The blizzard howled like a living thing, rattling the windows of Selene's makeshift shelter. Frost crept across the thin fabric walls, a silent reminder that death was merely waiting for an invitation. 3 days since her banishment from the Silver Pines pack. 3 days of hunger gnawing at her insides. 3 days of knowing that no one was coming to save her. They had carved the Omega mark from her cheek before casting her out. "Barren wolves have no place among us," Alpha Thorn had declared, his voice carrying across the clearing as her former packmates watched in silence. Not one had stepped forward in her defense. Selene clutched the small piece of bread in her trembling fingers. Her last meal, saved for when hope finally abandoned her. Tonight seemed fitting. The storm would claim her before morning, and at least she would face the end with something in her stomach. But fate has a strange way of rewriting endings. The whimper came so softly at first that she thought it was merely the wind playing tricks. Then she saw him, a white wolf pup, trembling and alone, his golden eyes wide with the same fear that had become her constant companion. In that moment, facing her own mortality, Selene made a choice that would alter the course of both their lives. She broke her bread in two. What she couldn't know was that somewhere in the darkness, Alpha King Ronan was coming. And by dawn's first light, the Wolf King would look upon a starving Omega sharing her last morsel with an abandoned pup, and see something no one else had ever bothered to see in her, strength in its purest form. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. Winter's breath hung harsh over the northern woods. The kind of cold that didn't just bite, it devoured, working its way through flesh and settling deep in the marrow. Selene felt it most acutely in her fingers as she huddled against the hollow of an ancient oak, the bark rough against her back. 3 days since her banishment. 3 days of hunger that had moved beyond pain into a strange, hollow numbness. Her tongue kept finding the space where her Omega mark had been carved from her cheek, the sign of her expulsion from the Silver Pines pack. "Useless," Alpha Thorn had declared, his voice carrying across the clearing as the entire pack watched. "An Omega who cannot bear young has no place among us." 5 years of trying with her assigned mate. 5 years of hope crumbling to dust each moon cycle. Until finally, the pack healer had confirmed what many had whispered. Selene was barren. Her mate had discarded her immediately, and the pack council voted unanimously for banishment. The memory brought no tears. She had none left to give. From her small leather pouch, Selene withdrew the only food she had managed to take, a piece of hard bread, saved for when her strength would truly begin to fail. The time had come. Her hands trembled as she broke off a small piece, placing it on her tongue and letting it soften. The sensation of even this small morsel made her stomach clench painfully. A rustling sound made her freeze. In these woods, anything could be a predator. Her fingers tightened around the knife at her belt, her only weapon. The sound came again, followed by a small whimper. Curious despite her exhaustion, Selene pulled herself to her feet, wincing at the protest of stiff muscles. Following the noise led her to a thicket of thorns. There, tangled and trembling, was a wolf pup, no more than a few months old, with fur the color of fresh snow. One of its hind legs was caught in the thorn bush, and small smears of blood stained the white fur. "How did you get all the way out here, little one?" Selene murmured, approaching cautiously. The pup's eyes, a startling gold, fixed on her with terror, trying to pull away and only entangling itself further. "Shh, I won't hurt you," she soothed, slowly extending her hand. The pup snapped weakly, but hunger and fear had dulled its defenses. With careful movements, Selene worked at freeing the tiny leg, speaking softly all the while. "Your pack must be worried," she said, though something told her this pup had no pack. Perhaps it had been abandoned, like her, deemed too weak or troublesome to keep. When the pup was finally free, it tried to stand but collapsed, its injured leg unable to bear weight. Without thinking, Selene gathered the small creature into her arms. It was alarmingly light, ribs prominent beneath the soft fur. "You're starving too, aren't you?" she whispered. Back at her makeshift shelter, Selene tore a strip from her already tattered cloak and bound the pup's wounded leg. It watched her with wary eyes, but didn't struggle as she worked. Night was falling rapidly, bringing with it a temperature drop that would be deadly without shelter. Selene gathered what branches she could find, constructing a small lean-to against the oak tree. Inside, She used dead leaves and pine needles to create a bed of sorts. It wasn't much, but it would trap some body heat. The pup whimpered again, and Celine looked down at her meager food supply. The piece of bread was all she had left, her last meal before strength would truly begin to fail her. In the brutal winter, with her hunting skills limited, she knew what it meant to give away even a portion. "Here," she said, breaking off half and holding it toward the pup. "At least one of us should see tomorrow." The pup sniffed cautiously before taking the bread with surprising gentleness. As it ate, Celine consumed her own portion slowly, savoring each bite. Strange, she thought, how sharing her final meal brought a certain peace. If these were to be her last conscious hours, at least she wouldn't face them entirely alone. As darkness claimed the forest, Celine curled around the small pup, sharing what little warmth her body still generated. The pup nestled against her, its tiny heart beating rapidly against her side. "I wonder what they cast you out for," she whispered into the silent night. "Being too small? Too gentle? Not fitting their idea of what a wolf should be?" She stroked its soft fur. "Well, tonight we're each other's pack, small as it may be." Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by shivers and the distant howls of hunting wolves. Each time the pup pressed closer, as if understanding their shared vulnerability. When the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of deep crimson, Celine was still alive, though the cold had settled into her bones in a way that suggested it might never leave. The pup was curled against her chest, its breathing shallow but steady. "See? You made it to morning," she told it, voice rough from the cold. "That's something." A sound cut through the still morning air, a twig snapping underfoot, then another. Celine's body tensed, instincts flaring despite her weakness. Slowly she raised herself up, placing the pup gently behind her. Through the trees, shapes emerged. Wolves. Not ordinary forest wolves, but shifters in their wolf forms, massive and deliberate in their movements. They formed a half circle around her shelter, their eyes gleaming with intelligence. Celine's hand went to her knife, though she knew it was useless against so many. If they were rogues, perhaps a quick death would be merciful. If they were from her former pack, come to make sure she'd left their territory. The wolves parted, and a figure stepped into the small clearing. Not a wolf, but a man, tall and imposing, with shoulders broad enough to block the rising sun behind him. His hair was dark as midnight, his face all sharp angles and stern authority. But it was his eyes that made Celine's breath catch. Amber gold, just like the pup's, but burning with power that seemed to pierce straight through her. She knew him, though they had never met. Everyone in the 5 territories knew of King Alpha Ronan, ruler of the northern ranges, the most powerful alpha the packs had seen in generations. His territory bordered silver pines to the north, and stories of his ruthlessness traveled far and wide. "So," he said, his voice deep and cold as the winter itself, "this is where my heir has been hiding." Celine looked down at the pup cowering behind her, then back at the imposing alpha. Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. This was no ordinary pup. This was the son of the Wolf King, and she was standing between them. For a moment, the forest stood perfectly still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as Alpha Ronan's gaze moved from Celine to the small pup huddled behind her. "Step aside," he commanded, voice leaving no room for defiance. Celine knew she should obey immediately. No one defied the Wolf King and lived to tell the tale, yet her body wouldn't move. Perhaps it was the weakness from hunger, or perhaps something deeper, a protective instinct that refused to yield, even in the face of certain death. "He's injured," she said, her voice small but steady, "and hungry." A low growl rumbled from one of the surrounding wolves, a warning she chose to ignore. The Wolf King's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in those amber eyes. "I'm aware of my son's condition. Now move." Celine's fingers curled protectively around the pup, who pressed closer against her leg. "What will happen to him?" The audacity of her question sent a visible ripple of shock through the circle of wolves. Some lowered their heads, as if anticipating violence. Others took small steps backward, distancing themselves from what was about to occur. Alpha Ronan's jaw tightened. "You dare question me? An exiled Omega with the stench of death already upon her?" He took a step closer, looming over her. "Do you know what I do to those who stand between me and what's mine?" Celine felt her legs trembling, not just from weakness but from primal fear. Every instinct screamed at her to submit, to bare her throat and beg forgiveness. But the small warmth against her calf anchored her in place. "I know what they say about you," she whispered, "but he's just a pup. He needs gentleness." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then, with a speed that defied his size, the alpha closed the distance between them. His hand shot out, not toward the pup as she expected, but to grip her chin, tilting her face up to his. His touch burned against her cold skin. "And what would an Omega cast out by her own pack know of what my son needs?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the weariness beneath the strength, and something else, a grief so profound it mirrored her own. "I know what it's like to be deemed worthless," she said, unable to look away from his penetrating gaze, "to be thrown away because you don't meet expectations." His nostrils flared slightly, and she knew he was taking in her scent, reading the story written there, her pain, her hunger, her defiance. His gaze found the carved-out mark on her cheek where her pack symbol had been. "Silver Pines," he said, releasing her chin but not stepping back. "Thorn's pack. They cast you out. Why?" Shame flooded through her, hot and painful. "I cannot bear children." Something dangerous flashed across Alpha Ronan's face. "And so they left you to die." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "It's pack law. An Omega who cannot fulfill her purpose has no place." His attention shifted to the pup, who had cautiously peeked out from behind her. Golden eyes, so like his father's, watching with intelligence far beyond his years. And yet, when faced with your own death, you chose to save a pup not of your blood. The Alpha's voice had changed, carrying a note of genuine curiosity. "Why share your last meal with him instead of preserving your own strength?" The question took her by surprise. How to explain something that hadn't been a choice at all, but an instinct as natural as breathing? "Because he needed it," she said simply. "Because one more day of life for him seemed worth more than one more day for me." Alpha Ronan studied her with unsettling intensity. Behind him, the wolves shifted, clearly confused by the prolonged conversation. One, a large beta with a scarred muzzle, stepped forward, growling something that sounded like protest. The king silenced him with a glance. "My son has been missing for 5 days, he said, returning his attention to Celine. 5 days during which my best trackers could not find him. Yet you, a starving Omega with no pack, managed to not only find him, but gain his trust." Celine glanced down at the pup, who had moved to stand beside her rather than behind her. "I don't think I found him," she said softly. "I think he found me." The pup let out a small whine, then did something that sent a collective shock through the watching pack. He pressed himself against Celine's leg, then looked up at his father and growled, a tiny, defiant sound. Alpha Ronan's eyes widened, the only indication of his surprise. Then, to everyone's astonishment, a smile ghosted across his stern features. There and gone so quickly, Celine might have imagined it. "It seems my heir has made his opinion known," he said. With deliberate movements, he shrugged off his heavy fur cloak and, in a gesture that left Celine speechless, draped it around her shoulders. The weight of it nearly buckled her weakened knees, but the immediate warmth was overwhelming, as was the Alpha's scent that enveloped her, powerful and primal. "Can you walk?" he asked. Celine clutched the edges of the cloak, drowning in its vastness. I think so." "Good." He straightened, addressing his pack without looking away from her. "We return to the northern ranges, immediately." The scarred beta stepped forward, shifting partially to human form, a painful half-transition that allowed speech. "My king, surely you don't intend to bring this exile back with us?" Alpha Ronan's response was swift and cold. "You question me, Varen?" The beta immediately lowered his eyes, baring his neck. "No, Alpha. Never. I merely thought, you thought I would leave the woman who saved my son's life to die in the snow?" Ronan's voice was dangerously soft. "The woman my heir has clearly chosen to trust?" No one spoke. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. "Celine of Silver Pines is coming with us," the Alpha declared, loud enough for all to hear. "Any who object may challenge me now." The invitation hung in the air, unanswered. Challenging Alpha Ronan was tantamount to requesting death. He nodded once, satisfied, then turned back to Celine. To her shock, he bent down and lifted the pup gently in one arm, then extended his other to her. "Come," he said, And though it was clearly a command, there was something else in his voice. Not quite kindness, but perhaps its distant cousin. Celine hesitated, the reality of what was happening crashing over her. "Why?" she asked, unable to stop herself. "Why take me with you?" Alpha Ronan's eyes met hers, and in their depths, she saw complexity she hadn't expected. Calculation, yes, but also a grudging respect. Because any Omega who would give her last meal to a starving pup is either the most foolish wolf I've ever met, he said, or the strongest. Before she could respond, he added in a lower voice, meant only for her ears, "And I find myself curious to discover which." With trembling legs, Celine took a step toward him, then another. The world swam before her eyes, exhaustion and hunger finally claiming their due. As darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, she felt strong arms catch her, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. The last thing she heard before consciousness fled was Alpha Ronan's voice, quiet but firm. "You chose to save a life when your own hung by a thread. Now I choose to save yours. The scales balance, Omega." Then there was only darkness, and the strange sense that she was moving, not toward death, as she had expected, but toward something entirely unexpected. Celine woke to warmth, a sensation so foreign after days in the bitter cold that for a moment she thought she must be dreaming. Slowly, she opened her eyes to find herself in a room unlike any she had seen before. Stone walls rose around her, not the rough-hewn stone of common dwellings, but smooth, precisely fitted blocks that spoke of master craftsmanship. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to roast a deer, casting dancing shadows across thick furs that covered the floor. She lay on a bed piled high with pelts and blankets, soft as clouds beneath her aching body. This was no dream. This was the lair of the Wolf King. Memories flooded back. The pup, Alpha Ronan's arrival, his unexpected decision. She had expected to die in those woods, not to waken the heart of the most powerful pack in the 5 territories. A soft whine drew her attention. There, curled at the foot of the bed, was the white pup. Upon seeing her awake, he scrambled up the length of the bed, tail wagging, to press his cold nose against her cheek. Despite everything, Celine smiled. "Hello, little one. You're looking better." Indeed, someone had tended to the pup's injured leg, wrapping it properly in clean bandages. His fur had been washed, revealing a pure white coat that seemed almost luminescent in the firelight. "His name is Alaric." The deep voice startled her. Alpha Ronan stood in the doorway, watching them with those penetrating amber eyes. He had changed from his traveling clothes into more formal attire, dark leather pants and a deep blue tunic embroidered with silver thread. A heavy silver pendant hung at his throat, bearing the symbol of the northern ranges, a wolf howling beneath a crescent moon. Celine tried to sit up, then winced as her body protested. "Don't," he said, entering the room. "The healer says you need rest." "Your body was close to surrender when we found you." She sank back against the pillows, acutely aware of how vulnerable she was in his presence. "How long have I been asleep?" 2 days. He moved to stand at the foot of the bed. "You were more exhausted than we realized." 2 days. She had lost 2 days of her life to unconsciousness. And the pup? Alaric? A flicker of something, approval perhaps, crossed Alpha Ronan's face. "He refused to leave your side, even when the healer needed to tend to his wound." He paused. "He's never done that before. Not with anyone except—" He didn't finish, but Celine understood. "Except his mother." "Where is his mother?" she asked softly. Pain flashed in those amber eyes, quickly masked. "Dead. She died giving birth to him and his siblings." "I'm sorry," Celine said, the words inadequate but sincere. Alpha Ronan's jaw tightened. His siblings were strong. They thrived. But Alaric was smaller, weaker. Many thought he wouldn't survive. His gaze fell on his son, who had curled up against Celine's side, apparently unconcerned by his father's imposing presence. "But he did survive," Celine said. "Yes." The Alpha's eyes met hers, much like someone else I recently encountered. There was a question in his gaze, one Celine wasn't sure how to answer. Before she could formulate a response, the pup, Alaric, yawned widely, showing tiny sharp teeth. "He's tired," she said, automatically stroking the soft fur. "He hasn't slept much these past 2 days." Alpha Ronan replied. Too busy guarding you. The thought of the tiny pup appointing himself her protector brought a smile to her lips. Quite a fierce guardian. For the second time, she witnessed the ghost of a smile on the Wolf King's severe features. Indeed. He studied her for a long moment. You need food. I'll have something brought up. As he turned to leave, Selene found her voice again. Alpha Ronan, what happens now? With me? He paused, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to fill the room. That depends, Selene of Silver Pines. On what? He glanced over his shoulder, his profile sharp against the firelight. On whether you're as remarkable as my son seems to think you are. With that cryptic statement, he left, the heavy door closing behind him. Selene stared after him, uncertain whether she had just been threatened or complimented. Perhaps both. Alaric snuggled closer, his small body warm against her side. Despite the confusion and fear swirling within her, Selena felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't alone. For the first time in longer than she could remember, someone needed her. As she drifted back to sleep, the white pup tucked securely against her, Selene wondered what the Wolf King truly wanted from her. Kindness seemed foreign to everything she had heard about Alpha Ronan. There must be a reason he had brought her here, a purpose she had yet to discover. Whatever it was, she would face it with the same resilience that had kept her alive in the forest. She had survived banishment and near starvation. She would survive the Wolf King's court too, whatever it might hold. Days passed, blending into a strange new routine that Selene could never have imagined. Each morning, she woke in the luxurious chamber. Not a guest room, she had discovered, but Alpha Ronan's own private quarters. The significance of this hadn't escaped her, nor the whispers that followed her through the vast stone halls of the Northern Ranges stronghold. Her strength returned gradually, nurtured by regular meals brought by servants who never quite met her eyes. Some regarded her with open curiosity, others with barely concealed disdain. All seemed uncertain what to make of the Omega exile who had somehow captured both the pup's loyalty and the Alpha's attention. Alaric was her constant companion, rarely leaving her side. As his leg healed, he grew more adventurous, leading her through the labyrinthine corridors of what she learned was called Wolfcrest Keep. The ancient fortress rose from the side of a mountain, its towers reaching toward the sky like the fangs of some great beast. Alpha Ronan himself was an enigma. Sometimes days would pass without her seeing him, only to have him appear unexpectedly at mealtimes or while she walked the grounds with Alaric. He asked questions about her former pack, her skills, her thoughts on everything from hunting techniques to old pack legends. He listened to her answers with an intensity that unnerved her, rarely offering his own opinions in return. It was on the 10th day that everything changed. Selene had taken Alaric to the inner courtyard, a sheltered space where snow was regularly cleared away to allow for training. At this early hour, it was empty, the training dummies and practice weapons standing silent beneath the cold morning light. Alaric bounded through the snow that remained in the corners, his white fur making him nearly invisible against it. His leg had healed completely, leaving only a small scar beneath the fur. Selene watched him play, a smile tugging at her lips. In just 10 days, he had gained weight and confidence, his eyes brighter, his movements more sure. He's thriving. The voice behind her made Selene spin around. Alpha Ronan stood at the entrance to the courtyard, dressed for training in a sleeveless leather vest despite the cold. Close behind him was Varen, the scarred beta who had objected to her presence that first day. His eyes still held the same contempt whenever they fell upon her. Alpha, she acknowledged, lowering her gaze respectfully. Yes, he's much stronger now. Ronan approached, his footsteps nearly silent on the flagstones. Thanks to you. Before she could respond, Alaric noticed his father and came bounding over, yipping excitedly. To Selene's surprise, Ronan knelt down, allowing the pup to jump up against his chest, tiny paws leaving snow marks on the dark leather. He's ready to begin training, Ronan said, scratching behind his son's ears. But he refuses any tutor I assign. Selene frowned. I didn't realize he had been refusing. Quite violently, in fact. For the first time, she detected a note of humor in the Alpha's voice. Garen still has the bite marks on his ankle. Varen made a disapproving sound. The pup must be taught discipline, my king. His behavior is unseemly for your heir. Ronan's eyes never left Selene's face. Perhaps what my son needs is not discipline but understanding. He straightened, picking up Alaric, who settled contentedly in his arms. Selene of Silver Pines, I have a proposal for you. Her pulse quickened. Yes, Alpha? Become Alaric's caretaker, officially. His expression gave nothing away, but there was something in his eyes. A challenge, perhaps. You would be responsible for his early education, his well-being, his daily needs. Varen stepped forward, unable to contain himself. My king, this is highly irregular. The royal heir has always been tutored by the Beta Council. It's tradition to give such responsibility to an outsider. An outsider who has done more for my son in 10 days than your council accomplished in 5 months, Ronan replied, his tone deceptively mild. Or have you forgotten how he was fading under your care, Varen? How your traditions were slowly crushing the spirit from him? The Beta's face flushed dark red, but he lowered his eyes, wisely choosing not to argue further. Selene's mind raced. The position Ronan offered was one of significant honor and equally significant danger. To be responsible for the heir of the Northern Ranges would place her in the center of pack politics, make her a target for those who disapproved of her presence. You hesitate, Ronan observed, studying her face. Why? She met his gaze directly, abandoning protocol. Because this is not just about Alaric, is it, Alpha? His eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of surprise. Explain. You're testing me, Selene said, the realization crystallizing as she spoke. You want to see if I'm worthy of a place here. If I fail with Alaric, you have reason to send me away. If I succeed, she trailed off, uncertain how to finish. What did happen if she succeeded? What place could a Baron Omega possibly have in the court of the Wolf King? To her shock, Alpha Ronan smiled, a real smile that transformed his severe features, making him appear younger, almost boyish for a fleeting moment. You're perceptive, Selene of Silver Pines. More so than most of my advisors. He set Alaric down gently, and the pup immediately ran to Selene, circling her legs excitedly. Yes, this is a test, but not the one you think. Before she could ask what he meant, he turned to leave. You start tomorrow. Varen will show you to your new quarters, adjacent to the royal nursery. He glanced back over his shoulder. Unless you refuse the position. It wasn't really a question. They both knew she had nowhere else to go, no other future to claim. And beyond that practicality, Selene realized with a jolt, she didn't want to leave. She had grown attached to Alaric, to his golden eyes and playful spirit. The thought of being separated from him caused an unexpected ache in her chest. I accept, Alpha, she said quietly. He nodded once, satisfaction evident in his expression. Good. Varen will explain your duties. With that, he strode away, leaving her alone with the glowering Beta and a very excited pup who seemed to sense that something important had just occurred. Varen's lip curled slightly as he regarded her. This way, Omega, he said, the title sounding like an insult from his lips. As they walked through the fortress, Alaric trotting between them, the Beta outlined her new responsibilities in clipped tones. The heir's education begins at dawn each day with physical training, followed by lessons in pack history, territory management, and combat strategy. You will oversee his schedule, ensure he arrives properly prepared for each tutor, and report his progress directly to the Alpha. He shot her a suspicious look. Can you read and write? Yes, Selena replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the condescension. My father believed all pack members should be educated, regardless of rank. Varen snorted. How progressive of him. Yet he still allowed you to be banished. The word struck like a physical blow, but Selene kept her expression composed. My father died 3 winters ago. He would not have supported the decision. Something flickered across Varen's scarred face. Not quite sympathy, but perhaps recognition of shared loss. The royal nursery has been empty for some time, he said, abruptly changing the subject. The Alpha Queen's death left a void that has not been filled. It was the closest thing to a personal revelation she had heard since arriving. Were you close to her, the Queen? We all were, Varen replied, his voice dropping lower. Lyra was beloved by the entire pack. Her death nearly destroyed us, and the king. His eyes hardened again. Which is why some of us are concerned about your sudden presence in the royal household. Selene stopped walking, forcing him to turn back toward her. I am not trying to replace anyone, Beta Varen. I'm simply trying to survive. and help a pup who needs me. For now, he conceded. But I've seen how the Alpha looks at you. Whatever test he's devised, I fear what happens when you pass it. Before she could respond, they arrived at a set of ornately carved wooden doors. Varen pushed them open to reveal a spacious chamber filled with toys, small training equipment, and shelves of scrolls and bound books. Windows lined one wall, offering a breathtaking view of the snow-covered mountains beyond. The royal nursery, Varen said. And through there, he pointed to a smaller door in the corner, your quarters. Alaric immediately bounded into the room, investigating every corner with excited sniffs. He seems to remember it, Celine observed. This was where he spent his first months, Varen confirmed, before he started refusing to enter. His gaze followed the pup, a complex emotion crossing his features. The Alpha will expect you both at the evening meal. Don't be late. With that, he left her standing in the doorway of her new life, wondering what exactly Alpha Ronan was planning, and why everyone in the fortress seemed to believe it involved her in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The great hall of Wolfcrest Keep pulsed with energy that evening, packed with pack members eager to catch a glimpse of the outsider who had been elevated to royal caretaker. Massive hearths blazed along the walls, their warmth a stark contrast to the cold glares Celine felt from many of the assembled wolves. At the center of the hall stood a long table raised on a dais, where Alpha Ronan sat with his closest advisors. An empty seat waited to his right, the Queen's place, Celine realized with a jolt. To his left sat a stern-looking older woman whom Celine had not yet met, her silver hair pulled back in a severe knot. As Celine approached with Alaric trotting proudly beside her, conversations hushed, all eyes turning to follow their progress. She had been provided with new clothing, a simple but elegant blue dress that fit her perfectly, though she had no idea who had selected it or how they knew her measurements. Alpha Ronan rose as they reached the dais, a gesture that sent a ripple of surprise through the watching crowd. Celine of Silver Pines, he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the hall. And my son, Heir Alaric. To her shock, he indicated not the empty Queen's seat, but a place to his immediate left, displacing the silver-haired woman who moved one seat down with visible displeasure. Alpha, I couldn't possibly... Celine began to protest, but Ronan silenced her with a look. The royal caretaker sits at the Alpha's left, he said, loud enough for all to hear. It is tradition. It most certainly was not, based on the horrified expressions around the table, but no one dared contradict him. Once seated, with Alaric settled in a specially built high chair between them, Celine became acutely aware of the silver-haired woman's penetrating stare. So, the woman said, her voice crisp with authority, you are the Omega who has captivated our heir's attention. Aunt Alara, Ronan warned without looking up from filling his plate. The woman, Alara, ignored him. I am the Alpha's paternal aunt and senior council member, she informed Celine. I have served 3 generations of Northern Ranges Alphas. It's an honor to meet you, Celine replied carefully. Alara's lips pressed into a thin line. Is it? Most would consider it an interrogation. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Omega, what exactly do you hope to gain from your position here? Before Celine could answer, Alpha Ronan set down his knife with deliberate force. Enough, Aunt. She is here at my invitation and will be treated with respect. Respect is earned, nephew, Alara replied sharply, particularly in this hall, where we have seen so many seek to use the pup to gain your favor. Celine's eyes widened at the implication. I have no such intentions, she said firmly. I care for Alaric because he deserves to be cared for, not as a means to an end. Alara studied her for a long moment, her expression inscrutable. We shall see. The rest of the meal passed in tense conversation, with various council members attempting to engage Celine on topics clearly designed to expose her ignorance or unsuitability. To her own surprise, she handled each challenge with growing confidence, drawing on knowledge from her father's extensive library and her own observations of pack dynamics. When she correctly identified the historical significance of a territorial dispute with the eastern clans, even Varen looked grudgingly impressed. You are well educated for an Omega, Alara commented, something new in her tone. Not quite approval, but perhaps reassessment. My father believed knowledge belonged to all ranks, Celine replied, the same word she had given Varen earlier. He said a pack is only as strong as its weakest member. A dangerous philosophy, Alara mused. It leads to questioning the natural order, or to strengthening it, Alpha Ronan interjected, speaking for the first time in several minutes. A chain with weak links will break under pressure. Better to reinforce each link than to discard them. Selene glanced at him in surprise, not expecting him to side with her perspective. Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of shared values she hadn't realized they possessed. The moment was broken when Alaric, who had been remarkably well-behaved throughout the meal, suddenly let out an urgent whine. His golden eyes were fixed on the entrance to the great hall, his small body tense. "What is it?" Selena asked, instantly alert to his distress. Before anyone could respond, the massive doors swung open to admit a group of snow-covered warriors. Their expressions were grim as they approached the high table, and Selene noticed smears of blood on their armor. Alpha Ronan stood immediately, his relaxed demeanor vanishing. "Report," he commanded. The lead warrior, a tall woman with a scarred face, bowed deeply. "My king, we found 3 of our border patrols slaughtered at the eastern boundary. Silverpine's scent markers were everywhere." A shock ran through Selene's body at the mention of her former pack. "Silverpines has violated the treaty," the warrior continued. "Alpha Thorn sends this message. He rejects your protection of the exile and demands her return, or he will consider it an act of war." All eyes turned to Selene, who sat frozen in her seat, the blood draining from her face. "He's coming for me," she whispered, the realization a cold weight in her stomach. Alpha Ronan's expression hardened into something terrible to behold, the full wrath of the Wolf King unleashed. "Thorn believes he can dictate terms to me," he growled, his voice dangerously soft. "That he can murder my wolves and threaten my household?" The hall had gone deathly silent, every pack member watching their alpha with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "Prepare for war," Ronan commanded, his decision instant and absolute. "Silverpines has chosen its fate." "Alpha, no!" Selene gasped, rising to her feet. "Please, this isn't worth a war. I'm not worth the lives of your pack." Ronan turned to her, his amber eyes blazing with an emotion she couldn't name. "This is not about your worth, Selene of Silverpines. This is about mine." His voice dropped, meant for her alone. "No one takes what belongs to me." The possessive declaration sent a shiver down her spine, not entirely from fear. Alaric pressed against her legs, whimpering softly, sensing the tension in the air. "My king," Alara spoke up, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Perhaps we should discuss strategy before committing to open conflict. The council should be consulted." "The time for discussion has passed," Ronan replied. "Thorn has made his choice." His gaze returned to Selene, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "As have I." In that moment, with the entire pack watching, Alpha Ronan reached out and took Selene's hand in his, a public declaration that left the hall in shocked silence. "Silverpines believes they can reclaim you," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "They are wrong. You are under my protection now, and all shall know what that means." The whispers began immediately, spreading like wildfire through the assembled wolves. Selene could only stare at the alpha, overwhelmed by the implications of his words and actions. "I don't understand," she said quietly, her voice trembling. Ronan's thumb traced a gentle circle on the back of her hand, the unexpected tenderness at odds with the fury still evident in his eyes. "You will," he promised. Then, addressing the hall once more, "Council members to the war room. Everyone else prepare the fortress. Silverpines has forgotten the consequences of challenging the Wolf King. It is time they were reminded." As the hall erupted into activity, Selene remained frozen in place, one thought echoing through her mind. This was her fault. People would die because of her, because Alpha Ronan refused to give her back to her former pack. But why? What value could she possibly have to him that would justify war? As if reading her thoughts, Ronan leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "You once gave your last meal to save my son," he murmured. "Now I would give my last breath to keep you safe. The scales balance, Omega." Before she could respond, he was gone, striding from the hall with his warriors in tow, leaving Selene to wonder what fate she had unwittingly set in motion, and what it would mean for both packs, for Alaric, and for her increasingly complicated relationship with the Wolf King. The following days passed in a blur of frantic activity. Wolfcrest Keep transformed from a stately fortress into a military stronghold, Warriors trained day and night in the courtyards, the clash of steel and snarls of practice fights echoing through the stone corridors. Supply wagons arrived hourly, laden with provisions, weapons, and medical supplies. The air hummed with tension and anticipation. Through it all, Selene felt like a ghost in her own life, watching events unfold with a growing sense of dread. She continued her duties with Alaric, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for the pup's sake, but her mind constantly returned to the impending conflict and her role in causing it. Alpha Ronan was rarely seen, locked away in war councils or inspecting the territory's defenses. The few times they crossed paths, his eyes would linger on her with an intensity that left her breathless, but he never spoke of what had happened in the Great Hall, never explained his declaration or the meaning behind his touch. On the 5th day, Selene could bear it no longer. After settling Alaric for his afternoon nap, she made her way through the fortress to the war room, where she knew the Alpha and his council would be gathering. The guards at the door moved to block her path, but she lifted her chin with a confidence she didn't feel. "I need to speak with Alpha Ronan," she said firmly. "It concerns the situation with Silver Pines." The guards exchanged uncertain glances. The Alpha's very public gesture of protection had elevated Selene's status in ways no one quite understood, leaving many unsure how to treat her. Before they could decide, the door swung open to reveal Ilara, whose sharp eyes narrowed at the sight of Selene. "Let her pass," the older woman said after a moment's consideration. "She has as much stake in this as any of us." Surprised by the unexpected support, Selene nodded gratefully and entered the chamber. Maps covered the large central table, marked with various symbols indicating troop positions, supply lines, and terrain features. Around it stood Alpha Ronan, Varen, and several other high-ranking pack members Selena recognized from the Great Hall. All conversation ceased as she entered, every head turning in her direction. Alpha Ronan straightened from where he had been leaning over the maps, his expression unreadable. "Selene," he acknowledged, her name a question in itself. She stepped forward, aware of the critical eyes upon her. "Alpha, I need to speak with you. About Silver Pines." "We're in the middle of strategic planning," Varen objected, but Ronan silenced him with a gesture. "Clear the room," he ordered. The council members filed out, some casting curious glances back at Selene, others openly resentful of the interruption. Ilara was the last to leave, pausing briefly beside Selene. "Choose your words carefully, Omega," she murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. "His mind is set." When they were alone, Ronan moved away from the table, approaching Selene with measured steps. "What concerns you?" Selene took a deep breath. "This war. It's unnecessary. Let me return to Silver Pines." His face hardened instantly. "No. Alpha, please listen." "I said no." His voice held an edge of steel. "The decision is made." Frustration welled within her. "You would risk the lives of your pack over one worthless Omega? It makes no sense." In a blur of movement, Ronan closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face. The sudden proximity stole her breath, his scent enveloping her, powerful and intoxicating. "You are not worthless," he growled, amber eyes burning into hers. "And you will never use that word to describe yourself again. Do you understand me?" Selene could only stare, caught in his intense gaze. "I don't understand any of this," she whispered. "Why me? Why now?" Something shifted in Ronan's expression, vulnerability breaking through the stern mask. "Because you showed compassion when you had every reason not to," he said softly. "Because my son trusts you when he has never trusted anyone since his mother died. Because when I look at you, I see strength that has nothing to do with claws or fangs." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her cheeks, the tenderness of the gesture at odds with the warrior before her. "And because I cannot look away from you, no matter how hard I try." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them were prepared to voice. Selene felt her heart racing, her wolf responding to his nearness in ways that frightened and thrilled her. "Alpha Thorn doesn't truly want me back," she said, forcing herself to focus on the matter at hand. "This is about pride and dominance. He cannot bear to think something he discarded might have value to someone else, especially you." Ronan's hands dropped from her face, though he remained close. "Then he should not have discarded you. This isn't just about me," Selene pressed. "Silver Pines territory borders yours. If you go to war, it affects all 5 territories, disrupts the balance of power. There must be another way. For a long moment, Ronan studied her, something calculating in his gaze. What would you suggest? The question caught her off guard. She hadn't expected him to ask for her opinion, hadn't realized she might actually have influence over the situation. She thought quickly, drawing on her father's teachings about pack politics. Challenge him to single combat, she said finally. Alpha against alpha, the ancient way. Ronan's eyebrows rose slightly. You would have me risk my life instead of my packs? I would have no one risk anything for me, she replied honestly. But if it must be someone, let it be the one making the choice to fight. She met his gaze directly. And we both know you would win. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his severe features. You have great faith in me, Selene of Silver Pines. I've seen you train, she said simply. Thorn is cruel, but he's grown soft. He lets others do his fighting while he grows fat on the pack's tribute. Ronan's smile widened into something almost predatory. And if I win this challenge? What then? If you win, demand a formal acknowledgement that I am under Northern Range's protection. No exile can be reclaimed once they've been accepted by another pack. It's ancient law, one even Thorn would not dare break. You know our laws well. My father made sure of it. Ronan considered her words, turning to pace the length of the chamber. A challenge would spill less blood, he conceded, but it would also deny my warriors the vengeance they seek for their slain packmates. The deaths cannot go unanswered, Selene agreed. Demand reparations as well. Silver Pines must pay a blood price for each warrior lost. He stopped pacing, regarding her with new appreciation. You have a strategic mind, Omega. Why did your former pack not see your value? The question sent a pang through her chest. They saw only what I could not provide, not what I could. Ronan's expression darkened. Their loss, he said simply. Then, after a pause, I will consider your suggestion. It wasn't agreement, but it was more than she had hoped for. Thank you, Alpha. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Selene. When she looked back, his expression had softened. In private, you may call me Ronan. The permission, intimate and unexpected, left her momentarily speechless. She nodded once, then fled the chamber, her heart pounding with emotions she dared not name. The challenge was issued the following day. A messenger was sent to Silver Pines territory bearing Alpha Ronan's terms. Single combat between Alphas to determine Selene's fate, with additional reparations for the slain Northern Ranges warriors. Accept, or face the full might of the Wolf King's army. 3 days later, the messenger returned with Alpha Thorn's response. Acceptance, with one condition. The challenge would take place on neutral ground, at the Stone Circle, an ancient meeting place where the 5 territories converged. It's a trap, Varin insisted during the council meeting that followed. Thorn would never agree to fair combat unless he planned to cheat. Of course it's a trap, Ronan replied calmly, but refusing would make me appear weak or fearful. His eyes found Selene across the chamber, where she stood quietly observing. And I am neither. The day of the challenge dawned clear and cold. Selene stood on the battlements of Wolfcrest Keep, watching as Alpha Ronan prepared to depart with his honor guard, 20 of his strongest warriors who would accompany him to the Stone Circle. I should be there, she said to Alara, who had come to stand beside her. The older woman shook her head. Your presence would only inflame tensions further, and if things go wrong... She didn't finish the thought, but Selene understood. If Ronan fell, she would be unprotected. He won't lose, Selene said with more confidence than she felt. Alara studied her with those penetrating eyes. You care for him, she observed. It wasn't a question, so Selene didn't answer, but the truth resonated within her, impossible to deny. Somewhere between the forest and this moment, her feelings for the Wolf King had evolved into something deeper than gratitude or respect. He cares for you too, Alara continued, surprising Selene. More than I've seen him care for anyone since Lyra. I'm not trying to replace her, Selene said quickly. No one could, Alara agreed. But perhaps that's not what he needs. She turned her gaze back to the departing warriors. Lyra was his past. You might be his future, if he survives today. The words hung heavy in the air as they watched the Alpha's party disappear into the forest below. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Selene tried to focus on caring for Alaric, but her mind continuously strayed to the Stone Circle and the battle taking place there. The pup seemed to sense her distress, staying unusually close and offering small comfort with his presence. As dusk approached, Selene could bear the waiting no longer. She bundled Alaric in warm furs and made her way to the fortress gates, determined to at least watch for the returning party. To her surprise, she found the courtyard already filled with pack members, all gazing expectantly toward the forest path. "Any word?" she asked a nearby guard. "Nothing yet," he replied, his expression grim. They should have returned by now. Anxiety coiled in Celine's stomach. Had something gone wrong? Was Ronan? She couldn't complete the thought. Instead, she clutched Alaric closer, drawing comfort from his small warmth. A horn sounded in the distance, a single, clear note that cut through the evening air. The gate guard snapped to attention, peering into the gathering darkness. "Someone comes," announced the lookout from the tower above. Celine held her breath as the distant sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Then, from the shadows of the forest, riders emerged. Northern Ranges warriors, their armor glinting in the torchlight. At their center rode Alpha Ronan, tall and proud on his massive black stallion. Relief washed over Celine like a physical force, nearly buckling her knees. He was alive. He had returned. But as the party drew closer, she saw the grim set of their faces, the tension in their postures. Something had gone wrong. The gate swung open, and the riders entered the courtyard. Ronan dismounted in one fluid motion, his movements betraying no injury or weakness. His eyes scanned the assembled crowd until they found Celine and Alaric, and something in his expression softened briefly, before hardening again. "My king," Baron called out, stepping forward. "What happened?" Ronan's voice carried across the silent courtyard. "Alpha Thorn is dead." A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by murmurs of shock and confusion. Celine froze, unable to process what she had heard. "The challenge was fair," Ronan continued, "witnessed by representatives from all 5 territories. But Thorn had no intention of honoring the outcome." He gestured, and 2 warriors brought forward a bound figure. A man Celine recognized with a jolt as Beta Marok, Thorn's second in command. "Tell them," Ronan commanded. Marok's face was bruised, his lips split, but his eyes burned with defiance. Thorn fell in fair combat. The Wolf King proved stronger. He spat on the ground. "But Silver Pines will never bow to Northern Ranges' rule. You planned an ambush," Ronan said coldly. 20 archers in the trees, waiting for my fall. When I prevailed instead, they fired anyway." Horror washed over Celine. They had tried to kill him, to murder the Alpha in violation of sacred challenge rights. 3 of our warriors fell before we could subdue them, Ronan continued, his voice tight with controlled rage. "The other territory's witnesses have confirmed Silver Pine's treachery." He turned to address the entire pack now. "By ancient law, when an Alpha dies in sanctioned challenge, the victor has 3 choices: install a new Alpha of his choosing, absorb the territory into his own, or destroy the pack entirely." The crowd held its collective breath, awaiting his decision. Celine found herself stepping forward, drawn by an impulse she couldn't name. Ronan's eyes found hers again, something questioning in their amber depths. She realized with a start that he was seeking her counsel, her permission. "What would you have me do, Celine of Silver Pines?" he asked, his voice softer now. "They were your pack once." All eyes turned to her, and for a moment, Celine felt the weight of both packs' futures on her shoulders. She thought of the cruelty she had endured, the callous disregard for her worth. But she also thought of the innocents, the pups, the elders, those who had shown her kindness when they could. "Mercy," she said finally, her voice clear in the silence. "Not for those who betrayed sacred law, but for those who had no choice in their Alpha's decisions." Ronan studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate movements, he stepped forward and took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that left no doubt of her importance to him. "As my future queen wishes," he declared, "so shall it be." The courtyard erupted in shocked whispers. Celine herself could only stare, certain she had misheard. Queen? Future? "Silver Pines will not be destroyed," Ronan announced, still holding her hand. "But neither will it remain independent. From this day forward, it is part of Northern Ranges territory. Those who pledged loyalty to Thorn's treachery will be exiled. Those who accept Northern Ranges rule may remain under the leadership of a beta of my choosing." His gaze returned to Celine, something soft and almost vulnerable in his eyes. "This was your home once, I would not see it burn to the ground. Before she could respond, Alaric wiggled free from her arms and bounded to his father, yipping excitedly. Ronan knelt to scoop him up, and the sight of the fierce wolf king cradling his son sent an unexpected warmth through Celine's chest. "We have much to discuss," Ronan said, looking back to her. In private, the Alpha's study was warm and intimate, lit by a crackling fire that cast dancing shadows across the book-lined walls. Alaric had been entrusted to Alara's care, leaving Celine and Ronan truly alone for the first time since that moment in the war room. "Did you mean it?" Celine asked as soon as the door closed behind them. "What you said about me being your future queen." Ronan moved to stand before the fire, his profile outlined in golden light. "I did not intend to announce it quite so publicly," he admitted. "But yes, I meant it." "Why?" The question emerged as barely a whisper, yet it contained all the confusion, all the uncertainty that had plagued her since that day in the forest. Ronan turned to face her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "Because from the moment I saw you sharing your last meal with my son, I recognized something in you that I thought lost forever. True strength. Not the strength of claws or fangs or dominance, but the strength of compassion, of sacrifice." He took a step toward her. "The strength my mate would need." "I cannot give you children," Selena reminded him, the words painful even now. "I cannot provide what a queen should." "You've already given me something far more precious," Ronan said, closing the distance between them. "You've given Alaric love when he needed it most. You've given my pack wisdom that prevented needless bloodshed, and you've given me—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Hope," he finished softly, "when I had forgotten what it felt like." Selena's heart raced as he reached for her hand, his touch gentle despite the calluses from years of battle. "I do not offer this lightly," he continued. "Being my queen means sharing not just my bed, but my burdens. The northern ranges, and now Silver Pines, would look to you for guidance, for strength. It is no easy path, and if I refuse?" she asked, needing to know she truly had a choice. "Then you remain as Alaric's caretaker for as long as you wish," he answered without hesitation. "Your place here is secured either way." The honesty of his response touched something deep within her. He was offering her a choice, something she had been denied for so long. "Why now?" she asked. "We've barely known each other a few weeks." A smile tugged at Ronan's lips. "Wolves know," he said simply. "When it's right, we know." And suddenly, standing there in the firelight with the Wolf King looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in his world, Selene realized that she knew too. Despite all logic, despite the brevity of their acquaintance, something profound had formed between them, a bond that transcended ordinary understanding. "I have nothing to offer a king," she said, one last protest that sounded weak even to her own ears. Ronan's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. "You offered your last meal to a starving pup," he murmured. "You offered mercy to those who showed you none. You offered wisdom when others counseled bloodshed." His forehead lowered to rest against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "You have more to offer than anyone I have ever known, Celine. The question is not what you can give me, but whether I am worthy of what you already are." The humility in his words, from this man who ruled with absolute authority, broke the last of her resistance. Celine closed the final distance between them, pressing her lips to his in an answer more eloquent than words. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and pain falling away, as they found in each other something neither had dared to hope for: acceptance, understanding, belonging. When they finally parted, both breathless, Ronan smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "Is that a yes?" he asked, a hint of boyish uncertainty in his voice. Celine laughed, the sound surprising even herself. "Yes," she said, "though I have no idea how to be a queen." "You already are one," he replied, drawing her close again. "The rest is just ceremony." Outside the study windows, snow began to fall, soft flakes drifting past like stars in the night sky. Within, the fire cast its warm glow over the Wolf King and his chosen mate, two souls who had found in each other's strength the healing they both needed. And somewhere in the fortress, a small white pup dreamed contentedly, secure in the knowledge that his family was finally complete. In the end, it wasn't power or rank that had saved Celine from the cold forest. It wasn't being claimed by the Alpha, or becoming a queen. It was the simple act of compassion that had changed everything. A starving Omega sharing her last meal with a pup in need. Sometimes she would reflect in the years to come. Strength isn't found in what we take or keep. It's found in what we're willing to give when we have nothing left. And sometimes, when we expect to face our end, we're actually standing at the beginning of something beautiful. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.